501c3, partly because we recognize that asset-based community development multiplication needed to happen all over the country, irrespective to denomination, and beyond the church sector. So we established ourselves as a standalone so that we could address the needs for asset-based community development theory, philosophy, and practice across the country, across sectors. So that was essentially the mission, the vision, and the history. We can skip to the next slide. I've talked a lot about what we do, but primarily we coach and train. So we're a train the trainer entity. We have community advancement coaches who receive professional development and training with Communities First Association. And as a result of that coaching and training they receive, they then coach and train in the local community, particularly with the indigenous leadership. The asset-based community development will be multiplied at the local level. We also do a lot of creating and learning. We ask a lot of questions. We don't always have answers, but we do a lot of work together to uncover answers. One of the big questions we're struggling with right now, for example, is how do you measure something that seems so absolutely organic? You feel me, right? And so we don't have an answer, and we're working as a collective to start to have conversations around what the answer might be. Maybe the answer is you can't in the systems and structures we currently have. So how do we use our collective impact to change the system itself, to make the system more accommodating, such that grant makers aren't asking us for things we simply cannot give them. That's a part of the work that we do. We connect, we commune, we have a national network of community advancement coaches, which makes for incredible collaboration and some real significantly budding collective impact. And we celebrate and share, but we often forget to do that, just like you do in your organizations, because it feels like there's so much work to do. We're working on the last one. So, the history of ABCD. John McKnight and John Pressman, co-founders of Asset-Based Community Development Institute out of Northwestern University, came together and said, what if we shifted the paradigm? I can't talk about this history without talking about my grandmother. I just gotta say that. I love John McKnight. He serves on the Communities First Association board. I would say to him, have said to him, my great-grandmother created asset-based community development because she needed butter and the lady next door to us needed cheese. And so they got together, they had a cup of coffee, they laughed and talked, they shared, they celebrated, they innovated, they learned from one another, and then they figured out what a need was. After all of that shalom was created, they swapped butter and cheese, and asset-based community development was born. Amen? All right, had to say that. After that, John Pressman and John McKnight came together, and they gave language to what our great-grandmothers already knew how to do. They developed the Asset-Based Community Development Institute out of Northwestern University, and they began to create common language and a philosophy by which we could start to have academic discussion around the cheese and butter exchange, if you will. The pedagogy of ABCD is significantly founded in listening processes. That you listen, and you listen for what you heard, and you listen for what you did not hear. And through that listening, you hear narrative, and you become highly relational with the people that you come alongside, that you work with, not to or for, that you first concern yourself with the assets that already exist in the community because God is already at work in the community, and you don't concern yourself with the needs of that community or that neighborhood until you have first considered, reconciled, heard, and celebrated the assets that are already there. We have tons of tools, some of which are appreciative inquiry, cognitive coaching, the difference between teaching, coaching, and facilitating, how to develop strategic plans, how to deal with conflict resolution in the neighborhood, because it will happen if you call a meeting. And those are the things that we help to equip our community advancement coaches to go out and share with other folks. We also have a pedagogical context. The holder in which we do this teaching is with sensitivity to cultural competence, race, gender, and class equity, and contextualization by way of urban, suburban, and rural entities. We teach about theology and the missiology of ABCD. What does the Bible have to say? What does Scripture have to say? Where is it written that ABCD should be a practice? And then once we learn the theory, because that's what theology is, how do we actually become the hands and feet of the theory of the Word of God? And we're everywhere. Everywhere. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Dustin, who's from Impact Cleveland. Thank you, Dustin.
Thanks. So we're a new neighborhood revitalization initiative born out of Habitat for Humanity of Cleveland and United Way of Bradley County's desire to make more of an impact in the neighborhood or in the community that we work in. Instead of, for Habitat, just building homes in entire neighborhoods, and instead of, for United Way, just funding programs. They kind of came together in a collaborative way to birth this neighborhood revitalization initiative. And our mission is to serve as a catalyst, so we are conveners of neighborhood residents and also strategic partners who can make a positive impact in that neighborhood. And we're working one neighborhood at a time with kind of an indefinite, but we'll see how long period where we're there in that neighborhood, and then we hope to take that model and plant it somewhere else in Cleveland and do a similar experience. So the context which I'm working in, Cleveland, Tennessee, about 50,000 residents. It's 20 minutes from Chattanooga. This is interesting. It's the 10th or maybe 11th most populous city in Tennessee, but it's the 5th most in industrial manufacturing in terms of jobs. So there is this kind of attitude that we're a solid working class community socioeconomically. There's an unusual amount of jobs and even businesses that are relocating into our area, as opposed to some of the more Rust Belt cities that have just lost jobs. Cleveland has grown tremendously in the last 20 years. Lee University and Cleveland State are in Cleveland, and again, I said it's about 50,000 residents. There are, I believe, 7,000 to 8,000 students between the two colleges, so significant student population. Tripled in size over the past 50 years, and most of all of that growth has been on the north side of town and around the interstate. That's important because we were in the south part of Cleveland. If you could go to the next slide, where in South Cleveland, it was really the first really residential downtown neighborhood of Cleveland, or one of the two first. And in the early 1900s, there were a couple large industrial factories that surrounded this neighborhood on two sides, and there was a major commercial corridor on another side, major railroad hub, half a mile from downtown. But it was a booming neighborhood at that time. And then, as you all know, and probably many of your cities, suburbanization, growth patterns led communities to grow into the suburbs and around interstate corridors, which this community was not. So 60s, 70s, this community kind of plateaued, if you will, in terms of its growth. And a lot of the homes were built pre-1960s, 70s, and it was pretty full. So it was a working class neighborhood that was in the middle of these two industrial plants that a lot of people worked at, bustling commercial corridor, and all this growth starts to happen northward and really westward. Next slide. How are things today? Well, it's extremely disinvested. Both of the factories are vacant. One is abandoned, the other is a warehouse for things. I've heard that the vacant Whirlpool property that's on the north side of our neighborhood, it borders the north side, it will be 100% vacant in January. Right now it's about 95% vacant. I've heard it said that it's the third largest industrial contiguous complex in the state of Tennessee. So it's this massive industrial place that's about to be 100% vacant by January. And a lot of people in our neighborhood used to work there. So that's disinvestment commercially or industrially. And then that commercial corridor, if you were to snapshot from the 50s, 60s, 70s up until now, there's all kinds of storefronts that are just vacant. So even though my context, which we'll get into a little bit more when we do the panel, is more, you might say, suburban, that's a little limiting because Cleveland is a kind of just more of a small city than a suburb. And this neighborhood feels more urban in some ways, like an urban Atlanta, not an urban Philadelphia or something with row homes, but it's it has an urban feel to it. Home ownership's low. People believe the city just doesn't care about this side of the tracks, and if you look at just investment patterns, it's probably accurate. So we are, I think, so slumlords are really bad and drug activities are in it. That middle one coming alongside, this is actually supposed to be part of the next slide, but if you want to go to the next slide. So what are we doing to address this? And then flip back, sorry, if you can. No, it's okay, we'll just go with this. We're doing a couple things to try to address this. We're bringing people together. The first point was getting neighborhood residents together. I'm blessed to have some folks here today that are from Cleveland that have been working in the Christian community development philosophy for 20, 30 years, who are here at this workshop. They were in this community doing workforce development and other things for about 5 years before I got there. And so they had relationships with community residents, and we leaned on them for a lot of those relationships. But they helped start a neighborhood association, and it was growing last year, and we've kind of built it up by coming alongside them to about 25 or 30 active residents now. We're bringing in strategic partners, we're advocating with city officials, we're engaging the body of Christ to be part of this solution. So that's kind of what we're doing in a nutshell. And who's next?
I'm Jen Krause. I'm with the Hinton Rural Life Center in Hayesville, North Carolina. If you've not heard of Hayesville or curious about where it is, it's one of the 5 far western counties. It's in Clay County, North Carolina. Most people think that North Carolina ends in Asheville. It doesn't. It goes another 2.5 hours, and I'm right on the border of Georgia and right near South Carolina, in that little niche off to the side there. I've worked with the Hinton Center for about 5 years now, the past 2 years full-time, working in their housing program. I started off, my cards, if you pick up one, will say Director of Development and Communication, but that lasted about 30 days. They got me into the housing program, and we now run, or I now operate a housing program that's taking on a new shape. As you can, the next slide, please. As you can read some of the statistics there, we have a very rural area. Population density is 49 people per mile. That's in stark contrast to the average in North Carolina of 200 people. You're lucky if you see neighbors where you live. I live up on the top of a mountain, and I don't have neighbors for about probably 10 acres in both directions, large enough to have several plots of farmland in between. Hinton Center's been around since 1961, and we've done work in far west North Carolina with the 5 counties in far west North Carolina, that being Cherokee, Clay, Macon, Graham, and Swain counties. We also work with Towns County and Union County in Georgia. There's not a whole lot of funding that we can do for Georgia because a lot of the funding doesn't want you to cross the state lines. The statistics up there are purely for Clay County to give you kind of a context of where we work. There are 1 in 3 children under the age of 18 are in poverty. They are food insecure, and they pretty much maintain that food insecurity through birth through 18 and then continue on into adulthood. We see a lot of generational poverty issues. One of the programs that Hinton Center, I guess, kind of latched onto maybe 15 years ago was the Mutual Self-Help Housing Program with the USDA. You get a 502 self-help loan and you build a house. That came about because Hinton Center was spending tons and tons of money building homes for people, kind of with the Habitat model, but not getting reimbursement for it. They were doing this out of donations and grant money, so it was only maybe 2 or 3 homes a year. Hinton Center has successfully built over 50 homes in the past 52 years. Then with this self-help housing program, then came the economic bust in 2009, where the job market just sort of dried up. We're looking at a 46% foreclosure rate in our community now. Clay County does have the highest foreclosure rate in North Carolina. So, got some struggling individuals out there and some programs that we're looking at now.
The next slide kind of tells you what our mission is.
You can read our mission on our website at hintoncenter.org, and it's about a page and a half long, and I didn't want to bore you with those details, so I kind of cut it down. We provide support for low and very low income families. We do that through our housing program, through our rehabilitation program. We do weatherization projects during the summer. I also run our summer mission outreach program. I was telling the panel earlier, we did over 120 homes with 1,225 volunteers in 11 weeks this summer. So tremendous statistics there, with an average of about $600, $700 a home that we put into it. So the year-round mission experience, we do the support to local churches to build healthy, vital congregations, and that is a term that you'll hear a lot in the United Methodist world. We're doing a lot of work with healthy, vital congregations. We were a mission agency of the United Methodist Church Southeast Jurisdiction. We are no longer. We get no funding from the Southeast Jurisdiction, with the exception of some debt relief. They don't fund us, but they do appoint a minister on our campus now. Still do that, and they have for the past 50 some odd years. We do have a firewood ministry. The truck at the bottom was our first load of firewood that was delivered. We had a little cold snap a couple weeks ago, and a little old lady started calling us, and they were getting cold, so we took some firewood out to them. And all proceeds from our facilities, we have a thriving rental, vacation, retreat, banquets, weddings, that kind of venue as well. If you'll take a look at our website, if you get a chance, we've got some beautiful pictures. I work on the side of Lake Chattooga. I face Georgia, and I can't complain about the view any day of the year. It's an absolutely gorgeous campus, but we do offer rentals and stuff, which go in to sustain our ministries. We're a 501c3 and have been since 1961, and we maintain that by reinvesting our proceeds into our programs, most of it being the housing program and stuff. So, and then I guess I'll pass it on to Katie.
Well, hello, I'm Katie Delp, and I am the Executive Director of FCS Urban Ministries in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been with FCS for 14 years now, and also living and serving in the community in which we have targeted. FCS has been doing community development for almost 40 years on the southeast side of Atlanta. And today, we provide holistic community development. So we do economic development, we do a lot of youth development, but I'm wearing my housing hat today. And we are a collaborative of several different 501c3s. And so our housing organization is called CARIS Community Housing. And CARIS partners with FCS and with our other organizations to do housing. We started in 1981. Bob Lupton, who founded FCS, had a neighbor who was losing her home. And him and some other neighbors just said, we've got to do something about this. And so they were able to buy the house, rehab it, and sell it back to her at a zero interest mortgage. And essentially that's where CARIS started. And by 1984, they had formalized and started doing affordable housing. We, for many years, had a very similar model to Habitat for Humanity. We would build homes from the ground up, volunteer labor. Then we would hold a mortgage, a zero interest mortgage to those who qualified. And we'd always do this in the neighborhoods that we were focused in. Some of our practices are we focus on one community and empowerment through mixed income home ownership. So all that we do, we are always striving to create mixed income communities, believing that that is essential to helping people get out of poverty. We also do a lot around intentional neighboring and relocating families of means into communities to create this mixed income, as well as to do just a lot of this just to be really good neighbors and give people a way to live out their faith in intentional ways. We also do a lot of strategic partnerships. We work very closely with Habitat and some other housing programs in the city. No one housing developer can do it all, and we recognize that everybody has their own niche. And Habitat's going to serve this population. We're going to serve maybe just a little bit higher income levels, and you need a lot of different partnerships to do it all because you want a diverse housing base in all communities. So we've completed throughout the city about 300 homes since 1984. We also, for about 20 years, actually until just this summer, but that's another workshop, had a transitional housing apartment complex and served about 500 families over that time. So since 2000, we've been working in the community of historic South Atlanta. We were invited by that community to work in that neighborhood. Just a few things. When we entered the community, it was only at 10% home ownership. Most of those were seniors who had remained in the community as it had declined, and there were several factors that led to the decline in the community. And they simply came to us and said, we want to see our neighborhood whole again. It was a beautiful place once again, and if there's anything we can do before we kind of go, we want to see our neighborhood whole. And so we said we would love to help you. And so there was high vacancy at that time, a lot of vacant land. We have about 550 parcels in this community, South Atlanta. And we were able to secure grants to slowly and quietly start buying up land. What we have learned from our experience in other communities is that you need to do things quietly and quickly in order to secure your low-income, affordable housing first, because you don't want the market, because once the market takes over, as a nonprofit, you're going to get priced out real quick. And so we were able to do that. We were able to buy about 120 lots, shared those with Habitat. They built about 60 of those. We built 25 or so of those, and we still are holding on to some of them. But so really able to secure that base of home ownership. The other, for our low-income families, also worked with some of the children of the seniors who kind of invited us in. Some of their adult children were able to qualify and come back to the neighborhood that they grew up in. And so those were some of our first homeowners in our program in South Atlanta. So we're kind of going along, we're doing our thing, and then 2008 comes along, and which shook up the whole country. Georgia was hit very hard, had most of the highest foreclosure rates. The sub-loan industry was just out of control in Georgia and in our community as well. So we decided, building from the ground up, doing these zero interest mortgages, this isn't making good sense. This isn't what our neighborhood needs. 50% of our homes went into foreclosure. And so we needed to be innovative, and we were small and grassroots enough to be able to do that. And so what we decided to do, we began to buy foreclosures. Most of them were investor built. We had a lot of speculative building in our community. We are near gentrifying communities, though we would not really be gentrified. We're not really gentrifying. But people who didn't know the city well enough, real estate agents would call our neighborhood a really nice thing. This is Grant Park, Atlanta. And no, it's not. But people just didn't know it better. And so we had a lot of really nice big houses going up, but then they were all going into foreclosure. So we saw very few families actually lose their homes. We did see renters get displaced because their landlords lost the home. But So we've been purchasing those. We've bought about 20, 25 of those. And all of those, we are rehabbing and essentially flipping them. And those are all our market rate strategy right now. All of those are being sold to families who are able to get bank qualified loans. And we can match them, some of the families, with some down payment assistance and different programs as well. But we are trying to move market rate workforce housing families into our community and really on the next phase of creating that mixed income housing. We have also just secured a rotational capital fund to do 60 houses in the next 5 years. And we hope that once we do that, the community will no longer need CARES, that they'll be able to, the market's going to take over and they'll be able to kind of take care of themselves. Our goal is around 70% home ownership. We think that's a healthy balance for a community to be able to be healthy on its own. And ultimately, we don't want to be in a neighborhood forever. We think that healthy communities care for themselves and are able to use the assets within themselves to care for one another. So that's just kind of a really quick story of what we've done. This is just kind of details. We'll talk about that later. Just a few kind of maps to just show you a little bit of the story of what CARES was how they were able to kind of stabilize the community. So this is our neighborhood, and the colors in blue are this is the percentage of change in property values, and the blue are the greater changes, and the red are the lower ones. And so you can see from 2001 to 2008 that property values were going up in our community. The highlighted boxes are houses that CARES has either had built or had some kind of strong connection with. And if you go to the next one, you can see what happened in 2008. The red is everything that lost significant value. And so our properties values just plummeted between 2008 and 2011. And then if you go to the next one, you can kind of see overall, when you look at the whole spread, that those CARES houses, those highlighted houses, and those affordable houses really did stabilize our kind of local economy. And we were able to weather a storm much better than a lot of other communities because we had secured that low-income housing base. And our low-income homeowners were the stability that got our community kind of really through the storm, which few communities I think can say. And so it's something we're pretty proud of. And then we need to update the map for the next 3 years. We are continuing to see slowly progress, and not just in property values, but just in the market starting to take back over itself. So in a nutshell, that's what we've been up to on the south side of the map.
Thank you, Katie. So Brandon is going to come by and pick up your cards, and we can start to take your questions more directly and explicitly now. While he does that, I'm going to pitch one question to the panel that ties my presentation to more of a general overarching presentation on asset-based community development to the more specific work that they're doing in their communities. And the question is, describe the asset-based community development approach of your ministry as it reflects the specific housing ministry context in which you work. How are you applying asset-based community development as an approach to the work you're doing in your context?
The first thing that we did that was, I would say, asset-based was we borrowed a tool from NeighborWorks success measures through partnership with Habitat for Humanity that is a community survey to listen to the community, to get input from them on what the greatest assets are, what the greatest needs are, what do you want to see changed. And so in March of this year, we did a community-wide survey, and we only targeted about 300, a little over 300 residences, some of which were vacant, and we got 162 responses back from community residents, one per household. So almost 60% response rate on folks who were contributing to this survey, saying these are our assets, and we turned that into a report that kind of summarized the heart and the desires of the community, and held a community meeting the following month that we presented the results to them so that they could kind of see that on a board and begin to prioritize the greatest needs and the greatest things that they wanted to see change. That was one way we've implemented asset-based since we began.
One thing that we did when we began in South Atlanta was meeting with the neighborhood association and doing a master plan with the community. And I think they really spoke up into the master plan with a lot of wisdom. And a few of the things that the community said that this is what we want and that we've held to over the last decade that we've been working there is, they said we don't want two affordable houses next door to each other. Habitat should never, we want to have a true mix. We've seen, some affordable housing companies come in and put too many right together. They said, and we don't want you to know which houses are affordable and which ones are market rate. You can drive through a neighborhood sometimes and know what the Habitat houses are. At least in Atlanta, they have a lot of different models, and so they said we want extra details, we want bigger porches, we want things. We want it all to blend together, and they just spoke a lot of really small details like that that were really wise, and that we're still really reaping the benefits of, that I just really appreciated. So, but we did a lot of listening, a lot of hearing from the neighborhood. The community was very adamant about everything being single family. Not sure that was maybe the best decision, but we've honored that because that's what the community has wanted. And so, yeah, just really letting the community speak into the master plan and exactly their ideal community.
One of the things that I would underscore about what Katie articulated as we talk about asset-based community development, one of the implicit tenets of ABCD that I want to name is serving with dignity. So two of the things that Katie brought up was, one, they said single-family homes. We didn't feel like that was the best idea, but that was their expressed desire, so that's what we did. And they may come back in 5 years and say, why do you want us to do that? But it was their decision to make, and so they moved forward with that process. The other thing is looking at those subtle nuances. Our porches should be the same size as everyone else's porch, and you should have a porch light because people have porch lights, and those kinds of things. There's dignity that's implicit in having that equitable approach to the community development work you do, whether it be in housing or some other entity or component of the community development. So I want to underscore that serving with dignity and allowing for indigenous leadership, voice, and articulation of need is inherent in asset-based community development.
And also, one of the things that we did in the past, Hen Center didn't really take into account what the community wanted. They just sort of took their carte blanche and said, this is what we're going to do. Now we are forming community groups that come together once a month or more to meet and say, okay, these are the issues that we think are going on. Right now we're trying to start Bridges Out of Poverty in our area, get an up and running program of that going, also with the Getting Ahead program, so that the generational poverty might be addressed in that aspect. So now we're listening more to what the community wants and taking that into account better, because in previous leadership, they would just kind of say, okay, this is what we're going to do. And when they built the houses, they let the homeowners, because they did use sweat equity in the mutual self-help housing program, they let them make their own determination of what they wanted. And before you know it, a $125,000 loan was over at $160,000, and they had to have a second mortgage on the home. So how can you take somebody that makes 150% of the poverty level and have two mortgages on a home, a brand new home? So listening to what they want, but also understanding where they're coming from and what they need, the tools that they need, and how we can best serve them in getting those tools.
One of the questions from the group is as follows. I have multiple real estate properties. How can I be of assistance to my church? I was thinking of setting up some sort of temporary or transitional living opportunity for families. Is this the best way to help?
I'm not sure what the best way to help is. You need to listen to the community and see what the neighbors really need. It may not be transitional housing, it may be long-term rental, quality long-term rental. I'm not really sure, but one thing I do know that we have learned from experience is to make sure it still makes sense as a business. Make sure that it is sustainable. You may not make a profit, but make sure that it is sustainable, because what we've seen is people get into business deals that they would never make when doing business, that they do when they think it's for charity, and it always goes south. So don't take off your smart business hat that you've been wearing to acquire all of these properties. Do some things with some compassion and with some justice, but continue to still make really good business sense.
The thing I would add to what Katie just shared is, the question was, how can I be of assistance to my church? And my wondering is, how is the church being of assistance to the community? Because oftentimes we look to say, how can I help the church? But the church's most primary mandate is to the community, and specifically to the poor, biblically. So I can't answer that question because I don't know the community or the church, but that's a place to start before you make a business plan, before you make a partnership, before you do any of those things as it pertains to the properties. Explore the relationship that the church has with the community and whether or not the community is having voice in the church's direction. Because if you partner with the church regarding the property, but the church hasn't partnered with the community, chances are there's going to be a disengagement between those properties and the community.
Our neighborhood is filled with a significant amount of slumlords. In terms of the percentage of rental property, it seems to be owned by a couple of families that are all somehow connected. And we are looking into the possibility of what we're calling angel investors, where well-intentioned people who are connected in that way with finances and real estate know-how, that they could almost begin to nudge out some of those problem landlords who on October 24th are going to be at the delinquent tax sale trying to scoop some up. If you are mission-minded and are willing to, some folks even, this kind of is a little different than what Katie was saying, but are willing to break even and have a business plan model that you're able to own and break even, but nudge out some of the evil or injustice in the neighborhood, then that's something to consider doing. But as it relates to the church, though, I would ask that same question: how is the church connected to that community? That would be good to know.
Next question, what are some ways to incorporate accountability and spiritual development into urban housing, both transitional and developmental housing? And then specifically for Charis, how did you acquire all of your data to create your maps? That's a good question.
For most of the data, we have partnerships with Georgia State University and Georgia Tech University. And we are able to use their GIS mapping systems. So if you have a connection with the university, it's really helpful. And they need neighborhoods to map. So they need things to study, and they've been wonderful. We've connected with some professors, and then we get these most of our professor connections are at Georgia State, but then we get these Georgia Tech data crunching kids who will spend a semester putting all that into the system for us, and it's been very helpful for grants, for understanding our context and understanding our community. So that's been a tremendous, tremendous gift. And I would, most of you are probably close to a university or college somewhere.
And spiritual development into urban housing, both transitional and developmental housing.
I'll talk a touch about it, but we've done a lot of different things over the years. We've offered classes and different programs. We've had family service staff that I think have been the most impactful of building relationships with our homeowners. And you can only make this stuff somewhat voluntary if they want to come to these classes. The home ownership classes, obviously, you make them do that. But some of the other stuff, you're kind of voluntary. What I've seen the best is the connecting neighbor to neighbor. About half of our staff live in our neighborhood. My neighbors are CARES homeowners or Habitat homeowners. And it's been in those relationships that most of the connection and relational discipleship has happened over the years. And so I think when you really take on this neighboring aspect in your work, is where you've seen the most transformation. Going to church together, being in small groups together, things like that. So that it's not the responsibility of the housing program to also transform this community spiritually. We leave that up to the neighbors who make up the community.
And in the midst of a conversation about financial literacy, you can infuse that with deeply Christian principles. And I would just encourage, it could be practical. It doesn't have to be an explicit Bible study, but it could be principles like financial literacy that open doors into stewardship conversations that lead into other deep, spiritually nourishing conversations.
One of the things that we do is offer we have a partnership with local churches. And once we go into a homeowner's house to do the rehab on it, whether it's build a ramp or replace the flooring or whatever, if we notice a need there, we've got a volunteer base that we can call on. This past summer, we deployed that volunteer base to a community member's home, and she's now very active in our local church. So we have one success story over 120 homes for the summer. So it's one of those things that you kind of have to get around sometimes to, having people come into your home and having different people come into your home. But if you work those partnerships and with those churches that are in your area, then the spiritual formation can come.
One thing that I would just add to what's already been said here is I had the opportunity to kind of do some learning in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and in doing so, I just watched how accountability was created in the community, very different in some ways from how we practice and define community here in the States. What I found fascinating and effective is that the accountability, even in people who, like missionaries who relocated to those areas, they were not, even though they were considered neighbors, because they had been there for a long time, they still weren't the ones creating accountability in that community. They allowed themselves to, or they chose to submit themselves to those accountability processes, but it was always the folks who were indigenous to the area who created and implemented the accountability measures. So I would just encourage you, if this is something you're considering, is to find ways to have the folks who are in the place not only create, but be the implementers and facilitators of accountability processes. Even in places that are highly transient, like transitional housing, not everybody's picking up and leaving all at the same time on how do you identify who those folks are in any given season? And support them empowering themselves in that way. But I would always go back to, even if there are relocators there who are in the neighborhood and, you know, a part of the community, how do you get the folks who have been there most consistently and for the longest amount of time to take on the responsibility of the accountability measures themselves? The next question is for Jen. This is rural stuff. How do you address transportation issues with rural housing and in a rural setting?
In Clay County, we have Clay County Transportation that'll take you to Atlanta or Asheville for a fee. So we have addressed that by having, we have our own vans that we can utilize during our summer mission program that now we're utilizing to go pick up our clients to get them to different resources that they may need. We've offered, with a grant that I wrote 2 years ago, we purchased a larger bus that has handicap facilities on it. So now we can transport people who are wheelchair bound or other issues, transportation wise. We can transport them anywhere within the 5-county area that we serve. So the transportation issue is a huge thing because there are no taxis, there's no buses. I was telling some panel before, there's no train service, there's no plane service. So it is very rural, very remote, and we have to sort of be innovative in the ways that we address different things. So coming up with the bus, the funds to purchase the bus to then be able to drive the people to where they need to go, or to our campus if we're having, poverty simulations and things like that. We also will allow them to do that.
Another way that takes some time but could be effective is to create a savings and kind of concept where the community understands that you're collecting these funds for this purpose, and you will invite them to participate based on that felt need. So these are the folks who would benefit from having something like that in their lives. How do you create collective impact to solve that issue or concern from the collective itself? So how do you get some of them mobilized around grant writing to meet that need? How do you get them to invest in it themselves? How do you get them to access folks who might have transportation relatively locally that they can access until they get to that point? How do you get the people in the community to develop a strategic plan around that felt need? So it's not going to produce a bus tomorrow, but they can set timeframes for getting themselves worked beyond that issue. The next question is for you, Jen. How do you help those with rural housing issues find other resources like food and jobs and those kinds of things?
We actually have a really good network set up with our local social services offices. The Jobs First out of Cherokee County, that we work closely with them to get people into jobs. The biggest thing you find in this 5-county area is that a lot of people are on disability and Social Security, and it's hard to get them off. And that's what the Bridges Out of Poverty Getting Ahead is supposed to do for us. And we're hoping that that is going to be successful. But for right now, Hinton Center did assist with setting up the Clay County Food Pantry, which is right adjacent to our property. We own the property, they own the building. And we have different interns that serve at different times for them. We also serve on their board. There's other communities and schools and things like that we try to be involved in to make sure that all of our clients are getting the proper resources. Now, prior to about 4 years ago, there was not this interest at Hinton Center to make sure that our clients were resourced properly. That's something that's just come about in the past 3 to 4 years. The minister that's appointed on campus with me, she and I got to talking after the summer program ended a couple of years ago. We still have people calling, and it was September, it was October, November, and we don't have people coming back in until May. What do we do now? So we started partnering much more heavily with our local community. Our social services and health department just opened up huge offices, so we were able to get our foot in the door there and get some more word out, and we're partnering more with Cherokee and Grand counties with their DSS and health departments. So we're finding that a lot of our clients are already resourced there, but then for food and food pantry items, they're not as resourced. At times, we have to make sure that, call them and make sure that they're able to get to the food pantry on Friday, or do they need help, or can we take it to them, those kind of things.
Next question. What can you do to counter real estate speculations whose activities price out long-term residents in favor of higher income gentrifiers?
There's very little you can do. And you've got to, and you just got to know, like, you're not going to control the market. They're much bigger than any of our little nonprofit. But, I mean, what we learned, so we tried to secure that low income base first. You just got to go in there and be really aggressive about that first, if that's what you're going to do. There's also a lot of interesting studies that are starting to come out, and this is a little bit controversial, but now that gentrification's been going on, and it's saying that gentrification is not displacing like we believe it is. Duke has a big study on this, and it's saying that people were already transient. And so, it's really, you know, it's hard to figure out, but that's what the data is starting to say, is that most of the people who are being displaced by gentrification are going to move anyway, that there are already folks who are moving every couple of years, and so that's not the gentrification that's displacing them, it's just that that's how it's going to be. Anyway, and I also think we've got to be careful to understand, are we filling in vacant houses, or are we really moving people out of the community? And I think we, as Christian do-gooders who are so passionate about our communities, we are sometimes blind to what was actually the reality of what's really going on. And so, and I know there's a lot of passion and feeling around all of this, and so people get really argumentative. But what we've done is we've just done so much infill housing, and so much infill housing needs to be done, and it has to be done, because the low density of our communities is what hurts them so much, because they don't have a large enough tax base, they don't have enough people voting, and they're just not getting enough attention because of low density. And so creating these higher density communities can be really, really good, and can be really good for our residents. And I think we have to be really creative about how we can keep some families in the communities. We need to be honest that some people need to go, and that's really hard, and I don't think that's hard. But I do think that we need to be just very realistic about what really is happening as our cities are shifting, and embrace some of the changes that are going to happen. And so if they're going to happen, I mean, Bob Lupton, a lot of you have heard, he'll say gentrification with justice. So how can we make these situations and these changes that will happen in our cities, they're inevitable, happen justly for all of them, for everyone involved. Shalom.
Let me preface my answer with, this is not a battle I've yet won, but it's a policy consideration to consider, and that we're considering in Cleveland right now after yesterday's policy workshop on housing and planning policies. One of the victories that Jill Shook mentions is that she's experienced in Pasadena is inclusionary zoning. And for instance, on the north side of our neighborhood is a 90-acre vacant, abandoned industrial warehouse that is causing real estate speculators to jump and want to be involved there. But if we can win a policy battle of, if there is residential there, that a percentage of it is affordable, then that's a way to kind of cut it off at the pass. And we've got to position ourselves to where the community is ready to do advocacy on a grassroots level, and that we're in a position also that we can speak to the powers that be on on, hey, this is a good thing for this community to be healthy. And so that's a policy consideration to help prevent that.
So it's 2:45. It is 2:45. And that time was so fast. Thank you all so much for your questions, and we appreciate you having come, and we hope that you have been able to glean some things from what we've shared. I will end by saying this. Oftentimes, we look at things as if they live on two separate poles. You know, we look at the community and the grassroots community development that is serving those who are from the place. And then we look at the opposite pole, which is the gentrifying, sort of incoming, sort of uprooting. And as we look at those things, I often feel like if we can somehow find the middle space, because there's goodness in, usually, if we dig deep enough, we can find the goodness in those poles. And if we can find a way to infuse those things, then we're working on something pretty incredible and probably kingdom building. And so I'll leave you with that notion as we continue our journey towards unearthing shalom in ourselves alongside one another, which is really what this is all about. How do we do that and